Hey, this is Gordon for Inspiration Tips. I am doing great today. Thanks for asking. And today I'm going to show you actually 15 or 16 tips in order to make your life with UV unwrapping much better. So let's start with number one. So the first thing you need to keep in mind, if this is a model that you're going to do for games, this is actually a low poly model that I'm working on right now, and I'm going to make a tutorial about it very soon. And we actually did the modeling. Next is going to be unwrapping and texturing. So this model is actually low poly, and it is very low poly, as you can see here, less than 10,000 polys, I believe. And if this is gonna be for games, you want to unwrap the low poly, because as you can see here, this is the high poly. It's extremely detailed. It has a ton of polygons and vertices to it, and unwrapping this one here, this guy, is gonna be a nightmare. So you want to work on the low poly, then you want to bake the high poly details on top of the low poly. So you need to keep this in mind, and this was number one. Alright, the second thing to keep in mind is that when you start to unwrap your low poly model, make sure that you remove the supporting edges and stuff, because it does not need to be supported, since we are gonna have a clever solution to this, and you don't need to put in there any kind of supporting edges or smoothing modifiers or something like that. Tip number three is you need to actually, let's convert this to poly quickly, which is tip number three is applying smoothing groups. As you can see here, when I turn off the lines and the edges that you can see here that we call edge faces, you're gonna see, for example, on this piece here, that it is very smooth, even though we are not applying turbo smooth or any kind of smoothing modifier. And the reason is we are applying smoothing groups. And to do this, you're gonna go down here, and you're gonna clear everything, and you're gonna auto smooth quickly. Alright, and to get things done. And if there is something you don't like or something that is not working quite well, you're gonna do fix it manually. I'm gonna do a video about this individually in the future. Alright, tip number four is when you have 90-degree angles, you need to break your aisles, and this is very important. Let's just open the unwrap UV editor, and as you can see here, for example, let's see this as an example. Here there are some interesting angles here, 90 degrees angles. I could have actually brought these two together. For example, this one here and this one. I could have easily attached them, but I didn't, because if you attach these two together, then the normal map and the baking process later on is gonna be problematic. So you're gonna have to break them now before they break your head later. This is very important, son. You're gonna learn this down the road when you start working with normal maps and stuff, and this is one of the most important advice from a professional people who are working in the field and the industry itself. So you better take their advice seriously. So tip number five, you don't have to unwrap the objects or the small details that you're not gonna see. We don't mean by this that small details like screws and bolts and stuff, because these are gonna be baked on. These are gonna be part of the high poly. For example, some small things like these, and we don't mean that we are not gonna unwrap them. You are going to unwrap this one. I mean the stuff that you're not gonna see at all. For example, let's just pretend that this pipe is gonna be separated, separate, and it's gonna be inside this piece here, and it's not gonna be seen at all. You don't need to unwrap it. Actually, you don't even need to involve it or to include it in your model if it's not going to be seen. And there is actually some better examples of this one. For example, if this piece here, this side, you're not gonna see, you are going to delete it. All right, you are going to remove it in order to reduce actually the poly count and work less when it comes to unwrapping. Alright, tip number 6, you need to cut seams in the right place or try to hide them as the best way you can, because you don't want someone viewing your model to see the textures that are not very well welded and they're not kind of working very well. For example, as you can see here, I cut the seam here underneath the cylinder because you're not most likely you're not gonna go underneath this weapon and look at it, especially if you are this is gonna be part of the game. It's very unlikely that someone is gonna look underneath this surface. Actually, the technology of today of texturing is gonna allow us to override these problems, and even when the seam is in a clear place, we're going to able to hide it because we have new tools and new software that is gonna make this easier, and it's gonna hide it even though we are gonna put it in a very clear and very open space that everyone is gonna see. But that doesn't mean that you are gonna be irresponsible where you're gonna cut your seams. Alright, number 7 is you're gonna have to for example, if you have borders in your islands, you're gonna have to keep straight edges. For example, let's select this one here, this shield, and let's open the UV editor, and let's see, for example, here, as you can see, we have straight lines. As you can see here, it's very obvious here inside, and on the sides there are very straight edges, and it wasn't like that when I started unwrapping them. I straightened them up very quickly, and as you can see here, this is very straight as well. So this is actually important, because when you want to create normal maps and bake them perfectly, you're gonna have to have these edges very straight. You better do this. Alright, tip number 8, which is actually related to straightening your lines, which is the inner lines, as you can see here, or the edges that are inside the borders don't have to be straight at all, because it's not gonna affect the result that you're gonna have later on. Tip number 9, I believe. Let's actually to explain this, let's open this one here. Alright, so the tip number 9 is you don't have to straighten all the borders, because, for example, if we try to do this, let's select this one and this one. Alright, this is not working at all. So let's select this one, straighten it, this one, and straighten it quickly. And let's see, let's go into here, and let's apply quickly a checker material and see what is gonna happen. As you can see here, it is completely distorted. You don't want to straighten all the edges. If there is a case like this where you're gonna have your doubts, and as if this is gonna be distorted or not, you're gonna try it, and after you're gonna have experience dealing with these kind of situations, you're gonna know straight ahead that it is not gonna work and it's not worth straightening it. Let's go to tip number 10, which is actually something that is a quick tip. Actually, it's not some big of a deal, but it is very important. For example, you're gonna have to make this give it its original shape. You're gonna use the relax tool. For example, let's relax these faces very quickly and start relaxing to bring it back to its original shape. But there is even a better tool, which is the quick peel, and in this small situation the difference is not very apparent, but when it comes to very complicated, insane, big, and distorted shapes, actually the peel mode, which is this one here, is gonna do the job very quickly and is gonna be more efficient. So tip number 11 is related to the checker texture, which is my advice, for example, is to have a checker texture that you can download on the internet. Just go to Google Images, write checker texture, and you're gonna have different and a variety of textures that you're gonna use. Try to stay away from the fancy ones because they are gonna distract you And if you are into these types of fancy checker textures, it's not a problem. For example, for me, I use the sometimes I work with the classic checker texture, which is this one, and sometimes when I am in a good mood I use this one here. This is the fanciest shit I can work with, because the others are very distorting, and it's difficult to see actually. They distorted your vision, even though the UV islands are very clear and they are not distorted. So actually the point is behind this, and the real tip is not to use the checker texture that you are gonna find here. For example, let's go to diffuse, click the box and use the checker. Actually 3ds Max comes with a checker texture like this, and if you apply it, it's going to seem like that it is working very properly. So let's increase the timeline to an insane amount, like 80 by 80, in order to make it work. And it seems like it is working properly, but sometimes in some situations it's gonna hide distortion that you are looking for, or it's gonna distort things like this when it is very clear that it is not distorted. So stay away from the checker material that comes with 3ds Max. You better download some other checker texture from the internet, because the internet has everything and you don't have to stick with something that is gonna distort your work like this one here. Alright, tip number 12, use shortcuts for God's sake. In order to make the workflow much faster, you're gonna have to use some sort of shortcuts, and I'm gonna go through some of these shortcuts actually that you're gonna use very quickly. So open the UV editor and let's see. Okay, so the number one thing that let's say, for example, if we want to straighten these lines, and this is something very important you need to do, not in this case, because if we straighten this one, it's gonna be distorted. So for example, in this case, let's you can just straighten these lines using a line horizontal like this, or you can do this from this side using a line vertical. And the shortcut is the shortcut for the horizontal is actually X, and the shortcut for vertical is Y from the keyboard. And in order to select the vertex mode, you're gonna hit 1 from the keyboard, and number 2 to activate the edge mode, number 3 to activate the polygon mode, and A from the keyboard to activate select by element UV toggle. And this was number 12, tip number 12. And tip number 13 is, this is not gonna work, the shortcuts that you're gonna use here are not gonna work unless you activate the keyboard shortcut override toggle. This is extremely important. If you forget this, then none of these shortcuts are gonna work. For example, if I'm hitting right now, let's say let's select these, Y from the keyboard, it's not gonna work. Let's say, and actually there is actually a very important shortcut I forgot to include here, which is let's select, for example, this edge here, and you're gonna hit Shift and S from the keyboard in order to attach these two pieces, which we normally don't attach, of course, because we explained that in a previous tip. Shortcut S actually for attaching these elements. And of course, don't forget to activate this keyboard shortcut override toggle in order to make this work. Tip number 14, which is related to the aisles, and this is extremely important. for now, let's actually I'm gonna jump to the model, or to the version of this model that I packed the UV islands in, to explain this even further. Alright, here we are in this file where I packed the UVs. So let's open the UV editor very quickly. And here, as you can see, these UV islands are packed fully inside the box that you can see here. And the tip I wanted to explain to you here is that you're gonna have to keep the proportion of these pieces together. You don't want, for example, and this is something you're gonna actually check if this is gonna be the case or not when you take a look at the checker material, and you're gonna see if there is a disproportion between these islands. You're going to see that these rectangles of the checker are bigger in some areas and smaller in other areas. For example, this big tube here, there is disproportion, an intentional one actually, because if we make a perfect proportion between these pieces, there is not gonna be enough space in order for it to fit all the elements and be proportional. So we sacrifice one for the sake of the others. Isn't that very glorious and noble? All right, so as you can see, the other pieces look like they are proportional, but except this one. And this is very important in order to have a very beautiful texture. So another thing included in this tip, which is an exception, that for example, if we have such let's just say we have such small things like screws and bolts and something like that, for example this one here, and this is very, very small, and actually I broke the law of proportion here, because I wanted to be actually more clear, and I wanted it to have a better texture on it. So you can actually make these small UV islands a little bit bigger in order to have them have more texturing and better texturing actually. And I hope you understood this point very well. And tip number 15, let's open the editor. And this tip actually is not a rule, it is just something that you better do, because you have to use your space properly. This UV space that you have, you need to use it properly, and you don't have to keep a lot of empty spaces like these. You need to make use of these spaces, and of course you're gonna make these pieces, all of them, proportional, as we said in tip number 14. And of course the 15th tip is to actually use the space properly and make sure that you are using it wisely. Finally, tip number 16, which is to define the right resolution. This is extremely important, because when we try to render the let's go to tools, let's say tools, where is it? Render UV template. Here you can set the resolution of your UV template. If there is a very small prop that you are probably not gonna see, you can get away with 1K texture resolution. But if this is actually a weapon like this that is gonna be seen from a first-person shooter perspective, then you better at least it's gonna be 2K. This is the least thing you can do, is to go with 248 by 248. Sometimes it is recommended even though to go with 4069 by 4069 in order to have something beautiful when you texture it. So the rule is, if it is not something close to the camera, you can have a small resolution. If it is something that is very close to the camera and the player is gonna see all the time, you better go with a higher resolution. I hope this video was informative enough for you guys, and I hope you took away something or two things from this that you didn't know previously. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, Inspiration Tats, and yeah, share this video if you think it is useful, it is something you you've seen that it was valuable and people can benefit from, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.